Hello, everyone. I'm Jordan Naidu, the director of the UNESCO International Institute for Educational Planning. We seem to be drowning in a sea of acronyms, so everybody may be more familiar with IIEP. So I'll just say that before I move on. Firstly, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining the second launch webinar for our latest publication, Leading and Teaching, Learning Together, the Role of the Middle Tier. Before I go on, let me also thank and appreciate the colleagues from the Education Development Trust, EDT, for the collaboration on this joint study and the publication. As I've already said, this second webinar follows the one we had on Tuesday, in which we discussed how instructional leaders at the middle tier can support teaching and learning. We heard from a group of researchers as well as instructional leaders from Rwanda, Shanghai, and Delhi about how middle tier programs have contributed to improve teaching drawn from their empirical case study work. Today, there's a bit of a shift in focus as we will be looking into how to move from policy to implementation and what it takes for instructional leaders at the middle tier to be successful. Before I go on to introduce the rest of the speakers for today and also a few other points to raise, as we await the other participants who may be joining as we speak, I would first like to bring to your attention a few housekeeping announcements. Firstly, note this webinar is being recorded and we will send out a recording of the webinar in both English and French to all attendees later this week. If you do not wish to be recorded, then I think you may have to leave. Otherwise, I take it that everyone is in agreement with us recording. The webinar is available in both French and English. To listen in French, please click on the little globe on the right-hand side at the bottom of your screen. The publication itself is not yet available in French, but it is in the process of being translated and will be released in a few months. We will also shortly be releasing research briefs and country notes, first in English and then in French, based on each of the case studies. Due to the number of attendees, we have disabled the microphone and camera functions for those who are not presenting. Therefore, for questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A box. You may submit questions in French or English, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible, taking account of any time constraints. We will also be sharing links and additional information in the chat box, so please keep an eye for that. We would also like to share with you the social media pages for both IIEP and EDT, and we encourage you to follow our work via LinkedIn, Twitter, and our newsletters. We also invite you to share your experiences of this webinar, tagging or hashtagging IIEP and EDT. So that's it for the housekeeping, and let me go on to some more substantive issues. First, we are very pleased to continue sharing this research with you through this webinar series, as we believe that the middle tier holds a significant place in improving learning outcomes around the world. Today's webinar builds on the insights and experience shared by the researchers and instructional leaders on Tuesday, which stress that we need to look at the whole system and to harness the potential of middle tier instructional leaders as we strive for quality education outcomes. There were a number of questions about who sits at the middle tier in the Q&A session in the first webinar. And just to clarify, we view the middle tier as instructional leaders, practitioners in the middle space between the state and schools. This could take various levels from subnational, district, and other spaces in that middle tier space. What distinguishes the leaders and practitioners at this level is that they intervene across a number of schools. They can be supervisors or cluster coordinators, or they can be school-based actors, including mentor teachers or head teachers, who are brought up to the middle tier to intervene across a group of schools while keeping their positions as teachers or ed teachers. In this research, we found that the middle tier professionals performed critical functions to improve teaching and learning. Today, as we turn to policy and implementation recommendations, digging into how we can apply this research through effective middle tier programming around the world. Let me now shift to briefly introduce our distinguished panel of speakers for today. First, I have the honor of introducing Andy Hargreaves, the visiting professor at the University of Ottawa and research professor at Boston College. And second, we were initially going to hear from Rich Churches, Global Head of Research at EDT. However, due to illness, Richard is not able to participate, and we are glad that Tony McAlevey from EDT is able to step in and present on his behalf. And Tony will lead the session, moderate the session to follow, and may say a few more words. I'm sorry, in the interest of time, I'm not giving more bios at all, but I think we can share those online. And third, we have Leon Mugenzi, Head of Teacher Development at the Rwanda Education Board. Following the initial statements from these three panelists, we will move to our country research teams who will reflect on what is required to make middle tier instructional leadership really work in particular contexts. In this regard, we will hear from Xiangye Chen and Wei Zhang from the Institute of Curriculum and Instruction at the East China Normal University. And let me also take this opportunity to thank them for joining us quite late back in China. Then we will have Jobin Thomas, the Global Associate Head of Monitoring and Evaluation at STER Education. And the third panelist from the research perspective is Jean-Pierre Mugiraneza of the Leadership for Learning Lead at Building Learning Foundations program in Rwanda. We will also then have insights from Barbara Tunier, the program specialist and my dear colleague at IIEP, who will review the overall research findings on enabling factors in implementation. After the series of presentations, there will be a moderated discussion guided by the EDT chair, Tony McAlevey, with all our panelists responding to questions that may include questions that you will raise as well. We will start with the selection of questions submitted by attendees in webinar 1, and then drawn questions from the chat today. Without further ado, let me pass on to Tony, the Education Development Trust's Education Director, who will be guiding the rest of the discussions today. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Jordan. And if I can reciprocate your comments, it's a huge pleasure and privilege for Education Development Trust to be working with IIEP on this important project and an important report. We're really grateful to have had this opportunity. And if I can also echo, Jordan, your thanks to our speakers and to our participants for finding the time today, middle of busy programs, to join us for this important discussion. So I am now going to hand over to Andy. Jordan has explained Andy's distinguished background, and I think he's a particularly appropriate colleague to be able to give us some opening remarks in order to set the scene. So, Andy, you're very welcome. Over to you.
There we go. Thank you so much, Tony and Jordan, for inviting me to be part of this very significant discussion, project and book between UNESCO and the Education Development Trust on this booming and exploding topic of working in the middle tier, and doing that in a global cross-cultural way, which is really also quite unusual. And I'll say a few things about that in a moment or two. Why has this become such an important topic? In the last few years, I've been asked to advise countries as far apart as Scotland or Wales, France, the Czech Republic, places across Canada. Why is everybody suddenly so interested in this? Well, I think there are three reasons, really. One is the context and the goals of education are changing dramatically. A few years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were talking mainly about how to improve equity and race achievement in literacy and numeracy, and possibly science in relation to national and global test scores and examination results. And at their best, you could do that in a somewhat top-down way if you had a lot of support of mentoring, coaching, time, good materials, and high-quality teachers. But the goals are now much more complex. In the UN, we have 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have over 30 global competencies with the OECD, including things like empathy, competencies related to identity, collaboration, critical thinking. So just what we're about in education is so much more bigger than it used to be. And the long-standing quest of achievement and equity is so much harder in the context of this complexity. And then secondly, there's a huge global movement towards greater inclusion. We traditionally think of inclusion as being about special educational needs, but inclusion now increasingly in practice as well as in theory means so much more than that. I have two granddaughters, and two of my 5 grandchildren, 2 granddaughters here in Ottawa. What is their identity? They're 8 years old. They're both girls. In time, they'll learn they're middle class. They are mixed race. And they're twins, because twins are a significant identity for people who are twins. So if you want to be inclusive of these girls, then you can't just tick off a box of color or ethnicity or gender that would enable you to switch the curriculum to fit their identity. You have to know them as whole children. And in a world of vast movements of people now, we are finding that we need to think harder about who these people are and how they can connect, and how they can all, in the language of 1996 in the UN, learn how to be and learn how to live together, as well as learn what to know and what to do. This is the Delors report, of course, of 1996. When we put these two things together, it means that we have to think differently now about pedagogy. So I am speaking on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and the Algonquin people in Canada. And it's not just a symbolic recognition, because across Canada now, educators, whether they teach Indigenous children or not, are thinking much more about Indigenous pedagogies, Indigenous ways of knowing, and Indigenous ways of collaborating and decision-making, where no one has the seat of power and everybody works together in a circle. So we're thinking differently about well-being, differently about pedagogy. And added to all this, there's a big word now called decolonization. We're also beginning to understand, as this great report shows, that countries aren't just places to export predominantly Western models of collaboration or leadership or pedagogy, but each country and culture has its own unique identity and things to contribute to the rest of us at the same time. Place all these things on the shoulders of an individual teacher or an individual leader, and the burden is overwhelming. To get to equity and teach all children effectively, we have to know the whole child. And it can't be the sole teacher who knows the whole child. The whole school, and sometimes even the whole system, needs to know the whole child in their fullness and their complexity. And because we're putting too much burden on individual teachers and principals, this is, I believe, one of the reasons why so many are actually leaving the profession now as quickly or as soon as they can in many countries. So how can we get people to work together more effectively? Because we know that this enhances innovation in relation to broader goals. It actually improves outcomes, and it increases teacher retention at the same time. Who you are is a product of who we're with. And when we're well supported, we're more likely to stay in the communities that care for us and that we care about at the same time. So could we have the next slide, please? Barbara, next slide, please. There we go. So you just saw the cover of the book. My work on leadership, what we call leadership from the middle, is really began over 10 years ago in Ontario in Canada, when districts working together collaboratively across Ontario, population involving over 5,000 schools, were responsible collectively for inclusion. Collectively. They were responsible for each other's results, not only their own results. And the strategies of inclusion they developed fit each unique district, but they also learned from each other and assisted each other in being collectively responsible for their results and their outcomes. Leading from the middle, the first time I've ever seen it in the literature anywhere, was their concept, not our concept. They didn't follow us, we followed them. And in part, this is why this is out there in the terrain now. It's a practitioner's concept, not a theoretician's concept. So what are we learning from it? We're learning, well, the middle, actually, in many languages, the middle is not a good place to be. Think of middle age, a middle school, a middle child. In Sweden, they have middle beer, which is between light and heavy beer. The middle is somehow a compromise, not a thing of its own, something that connects other things that are more important. But in Arabic culture, the middle is the best place to be. In Buddhist culture, it's the point of harmony and balance. And for Aristotle in Greece, it was the golden mean. So the middle can be a place of great strength, not just something to join up other parts of the system. And the UNESCO report is very clear about this. It's more than just a connector, but it can be a driver of everything that's going on in a system that's working well. And when we talk to people who've been at this for a few years, they indicated that leadership from the middle, or the middle tier, in the words of this document, has three components, and I'll just show you them quickly. First is a philosophy. So next slide, please. A philosophy of what you're about, where you're going, why it's important. So in one district, in a very indigenous way, though they weren't indigenous, this is what leadership from the middle looked like to them. They got some birch bark twigs, iconic in Ontario, sawed them off and wrote these statements. For them, the middle is like the heart of a tree that grows out and creates great branches and trunks and connects the trees over time. It's increasingly about growth, harmony, circles, connection. It's a naturalistic metaphor that's very important to a lot of people. And this, they believe, leading from the middle tier, is what brings leaders, teacher leaders, in all these different ways described in the report, closer to the children, closer to the action, closer to the decisions that most affect them. Next slide, please. And second, you need a structure to make this happen. It's no use just believing this, but you need clear structures. And there are many in this report. There are research groups, leadership networks, leadership academies, leadership cadres, mentor teachers, and so on. Could we have the next slide, please? And what this slide will show you in just a second when it comes is that there is, do we have it or do we not? Do we have it? Yes, no, Barbara? Yes, no? All right, I'll have to draw it for you. Here we go. In a number of the schools we work with now, and we see this in many places, that the equivalent. When there's a child who is struggling in a school, it's not just the individual teacher's responsibility, or even the support teacher who works in the classroom with that teacher. It's the responsibility of everybody who knows that child, a wonderful child, a student of wonder, but they wonder why the student struggles. So you place a picture of the child in the middle of the table, and you surround that picture with everybody who knows the child, the speech pathologist, the physiotherapist, the school administrator, the janitor, the teacher who taught them last year. So there are many structures, but once you've got a philosophy of middle tier, you need, as this report articulates very well, clear structures of things like research leaders or head teacher cadres to make that happen. And then finally, you need a culture, a way of being, a set of beliefs, practices you hold in common, and ways of interacting. And in our book on collaborative professionalism, based on studies of 5 outstanding examples of different kinds of collaboration around the world, in Colombia, in Hong Kong, in the United States, in Canada, and in Norway, so quite different contexts, we basically said there are 2 things that are important in this culture, however they play out. And those are, you need solidarity. So you need to pay deliberate attention to relationships, to trust, to working together, to knowing your people, to caring for the adults, to well-being amongst the teachers, as well as well-being amongst the children. You have to do that. And you need solidity of structures, outcomes, data, protocols, responsibilities. Protocols, for example, when you're giving feedback, are extremely important because if you give feedback informally, you'll either offend people or, because you don't want to offend them, you'll not give any critical feedback. You'll only give positive feedback. The point of a protocol is not to replace a relationship. It's to strengthen a relationship. So I welcome this report. I welcome it because it addresses a really important topic with 2 very influential organizations with a lot of muscle and impact behind them. And because it's suited to the complex modern world that we're in, with the right educational values, and because it takes place in this powerful cross-cultural context, which is good not only for those contexts, essential for them, but it's something we can learn for all of us. It's essential for those contexts, but good for everyone. I look forward to the rest of the seminar.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy, for such a fantastic start to the event. Really inspirational and great in terms of setting the global context for the focus here. And good to know that we're talking about something that's so important and so much part of the professional zeitgeist, if you like, just now. And what you say, I find completely compelling, that top-down directives are not a way of creating great school systems. They may have some benefits, but if we want to unlock professionalism, we've got to do things differently in the collaborative way that you've described. So fantastic. Thank you so much. Right. Now, I'd like to say a little bit about some of the insights in the report that relate to the Jordanian case study. And in terms of the focus here on implementation, to think a little bit about the kind of skills that actors at the middle tier, doing the kind of role, being the catalysts that will be assisting that rich professionalism that Andy's been describing. Well, what do they look like? What do they need to know? What should they be doing? And how far should we be trying to create school systems that are evidence-driven, evidence-informed as part of their professionalism. So next slide, please. Okay, so the context here is in the Kingdom of Jordan is that as in many other countries, there's been a debate going on about how the state should interact with the schools. And there's been a long-standing cadre of professionals who are known as supervisors, who are ministry employees and who engage with teachers and head teachers, traditionally with a particular focus on the performance management of the teachers. And supervisors as a concept can be found in lots of countries, particularly in North Africa and the Middle East. In the particular context of Jordan, since 2015, actually it predates that, but there were some specific reforms in 2015. The role has shifted. The role has shifted from, if you like, an inspectorial role, a compliance role, a checking role, to more of a developmental role, towards a concept of the supervisor as a critical friend to the teacher. And we in Education Development Trust had a wonderful opportunity to do some work. We've been working with colleagues in Jordan about making this new role, if you like, a reality. And in the context of the new role, as before, the supervisors conduct classroom observations. But these aren't, as they used to be, simply an opportunity, if you like, for a kind of grade to be awarded and a score to be given and a check to be undertaken as to whether aspects of the curriculum were being delivered appropriately. Now it's an opportunity for the teachers to be provided with formative guidance, diagnostic feedback intended to help them to improve their pedagogical practice. So next slide, please. So that's the context, but it's a context that actually is quite professionally demanding. This isn't an easy job. And I think we need to reflect when we're thinking about implementation and the work of the middle tier about the specific skills, aptitudes, backgrounds that folks need if they're going to do this important but difficult job effectively. And there are many facets to this, but one is the ability to give effective feedback, to have the right kind of professional conversation. And that depends on professional development. That depends on professional learning. This isn't something you just know. We need to provide people with the right opportunities for professional learning. If middle tier actors are to be effective in this role as change management agents, as the catalysts. And it's in this context that we ask the question, so what skills do you need and what knowledge do you need? And actually the answer is, well, quite a lot actually, but here's a couple of specifics that are really important. Skills in the right kind of coaching techniques that build on what the world knows, not just educationists, but a wider body of knowledge about high impact coaching, and knowledge, actual content knowledge about promising and best practices that derive from the best available evidence. So we're proposing that the middle tier actors need to be supported in these two domains. So next slide, please. So the world knows a lot about effective coaching, and there are different schools and there are different approaches, and we can learn a lot in education from other sectors. But one very impressive model that we've used in Jordan, it's not original, it's very extensively used. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with it. It's called the GROW model, and it's GROW because it's about professional growth, and it's GROW because it derives from the acronym, the abbreviation, to do with a process that involves the individual taking charge of their professional learning and setting for themselves, with the assistance of the coach, a goal a set of where he or she wants to be in terms of the growth journey, to do with helping the individual to do a gap analysis to understand the distance between where they are and where they would like to be, a reality check, if you like, with the coach assisting this process of personal understanding, to do with understanding how one can then take action, the things that one might do, the options for action that might lead to professional growth, and then a commitment to act, to do with the will, and sometimes people talk about it as the way forward. So we need middle tier actors who have these kind of insights, and this is the basis in part of a professional development program that we've run successfully with a group of supervisors in Jordan. Next slide, please. And our contention is that the coaching skill is important. The ability to give diagnostic feedback is important, but it's not enough. There's also content that's important. And maybe one of the roles of the coach is as a broker for relevant content that the teacher might find useful on the journey. And here we've been very influenced, as have lots of other people, by lessons from other sectors, particularly medicine. And I think it's fair to say that in medicine, there has been historically a greater emphasis than in school education on evidence and the concept of evidence-based professionalism. And that it's embedded, this idea that doctors and nurses need to reflect on their own practice and how it relates to the best available robust research with lead practitioners. This is what leading clinicians do all the time in our hospitals worldwide, leading clinicians, helping less experienced staff to apply insights from the best research. So that's what we've been trying to do in the Jordanian context with the supervisors. And in part, we did that by creating a bank of evidence cards that tried to present in a user-friendly way for teachers insights based on the best available evidence. Next slide, please. And the idea was that the evidence provided, if you like, some of the fuel for this kind of coaching machine, this cycle, that there would be diagnostic lesson observations, a discussion about aspects of practice where the teacher wanted to reflect and seek to improve, and then an opportunity to learn lessons from evidence that relate to that particular facet of pedagogy, mediated by these evidence cards, these intervention cards. And there's one example on the slide there that maybe the teacher wants to be a bit more imaginative about the use of space in the room, wants to break away from a traditional lecture structure, at least for certain appropriate learning opportunities, and to think about other approaches to the use of the room that might facilitate better group work, better classroom discussion, etc. So what does the evidence say about when different techniques are appropriate and what you need to do in order to make them effective? We feed that into the conversation via the supervisor. Next slide, please. And the whole thing is meant to be extremely user-friendly, but it also recognizes context, different phase context. How old are your children? That makes a big difference if you're thinking about the way you use the space. What's the subject? Clearly, mathematics and physical education are so different. So we've got to be very mindful of these questions of phase and context. And we need to base it on the best available evidence, but to wear our learning lightly, if you like. So there are references at the back to where this comes from that people can check. But above all, it's seeking to present robust evidence for practitioners, busy practitioners who can't actually have the time to maybe read all the relevant papers. So that's, in essence, some of the lessons from our work. It's a case, I think, for us sort of conceptualizing the need for a better understanding of middle-tier professionalism. And for the future, maybe we need to build a global body of knowledge about middle-tier professionalism, learning, for example, from other sectors about effective coaching relationships, learning, for example, from medicine about the need to access and apply insights from robust research. So thank you very much. That was related, obviously, to the Jordanian case study, and now I'm delighted to say we're going to hear something about another case study in a very different context in Rwanda. I'm delighted that Leon, the head of teacher development at REB, the Rwanda Education Board, has been able to join us to tell us something about sustaining improvements in middle-tier leadership reforms in Rwanda. So, Leon, great that you're here, and over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you the story and for this context in Rwanda. I'm very happy that when we talk about policy or sustaining improvement in middle-tier leadership reforms in Rwanda. So first of all, readers of learning play an intermediate role. That's the first thing to know between school leaders and education officials at the sector and district level. Here we have in Rwanda what we call district is we have 60 national leaders of learning. We have normally 30 districts in Rwanda, meaning we have 2 national leaders of learning, 2 per district. So we have under the district, we have also local leaders of learning, where we have normally 416 sectors, administrative sectors, meaning you have 1 per sector, local leaders of learning. So how did I collaborate and how it works here in Rwanda? Leaders of learning play an intermediate role between school leaders and education officials at sector district level. But the collaborative networks, that's what is very important, have been strengthened through professional learning communities, what we call PLC. It's working to solve system issues related to students dropout, supporting students with disabilities, training new head teachers. This is a key role, and this collaborative way is very helpful for our education system. But also, they are improving leadership standards across core competence areas. Here we have developed what we call a 5 standard for effective school leadership, which are those standards that are very key for our head teachers. Normally, the first standard is having a vision of a school. The second one, leading teaching, and third, leading learning. The fourth is collaboration of between collaboration with parents, communities, but also the last one is really to leading a school as an organization. So we have those 5 standards, and those national leaders of learning are training normally local leaders of learning. And those local leaders of learning, they are normally supporting our head teachers just to be effective in school leadership. So other school leaders, meaning the rest, because if we select the best school leaders at national level, but also having at the sector level the best one again, they are training others, other school leaders, for really implementing, improving their skills, but also improving the way of reading the school. So that's how we are working here in Rwanda. When we talk about national leaders of learning and local leaders of learning. So also school leaders, if I can say, here in Rwanda, we have also not only this system which is well structured, but also we have what we can call school leaders are regarded as a key improvement in teaching and learning as reflected in new policies and the professional standard. As I said, the professional standard for school leaders are, I can say that there are the key elements to assess the performance of our head teachers. So explicit in the strong collaborative vision for educational leaders at district and at school level. So Rwanda Basic Education Board normally is in the process of establishing a new professional learning community framework to guide the implementation of those professional learning communities across all sectors in Rwanda. So we have really to understand that if we need our head teachers to improve their practices, to improve the way of working, we have also to have the framework. That's why we say this is professional learning communities framework. So we are normally revising this so that we can, again, regarding of what we have to in our policies, we have to strengthen these leadership skills for our head teachers. But the framework also set out the roles and responsibility of national leaders and or local leaders of learning, where we have to establish these winning policies such as they become a sustained and integral part of the system. So we are very happy that now what we need is really to have this sustainability of this system where our head teachers, our school leaders will be strengthened through this platform of national leaders of learning and the local leaders of learning, so that our head teachers, their the capacity development of our head teachers is really strengthened very, very well. So for leadership for learning model, we help us to focus on system on the coordination of continuous professional development for school leaders in Rwanda. So there's the three elements we can highlight here is to build the capacity for strengthen the whole system, also capitalized through professional learning communities, is in a way that is sustainable. So, but also to enable an aligned reform effort working with the existing role within the system. So here in the Rwanda Basic Education Board, normally we have the department in charge of teacher development management, but also we are in charge of school leaders. So where we have the unit in charge of school leadership is specifically. So they are always following up these implementation of professional learning communities, and so that this should be no more sustainable, but also adapted from the educational system and in different contexts, the UK, India, and South Africa, where models of competence also related, work-based learning and peer collaborative leadership have proven to have impact. So we are learning from different contexts, and we have seen that it's really very important for our education system also, if we work like we have learned from elsewhere. I think we can say that school leadership here in Rwanda, collaborative way here in Rwanda of head teachers sharing the best practices. This is the choice. We have our choice now in our education sector to maintain this effective school leadership in Rwanda. So without delaying, I would like to thank you for your kind attention, and I think we have time just to continue to reflect, but I'm very happy that I have this opportunity to share with you this context in Rwanda So we are very happy to continue collaborating with all participants if they have questions to highlight and so on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Leon. It's such an interesting case study, and there's so much there actually to reflect upon. And I'm struck by the way in which the edges are blurred, if you like, between the system, the district, and the schools, with these head teachers working across their own school, a community of their peers, and working with the district as well. Really, really interesting, and interesting as well the focus on leadership, which of course was the one of the words that Andy rightly emphasized. Brilliant. Okay, well, we're going to we'll return to Leon and to Andy later in the session, but now we're going to just have a closer look at some issues to do with this question of implementation. So yes, this is all very well, but how do we do the right thing? Questions of implementation, what is required to make instructional leadership at the middle tier work. And we're going to have a brief input from the three of the country teams who did the research in the report. And I think I'm right in saying that first we're going to hear from Rwanda, and that Jean-Pierre is going to join us and tell us a little about implementation from the Rwandan context. So, Jean-Pierre, over to you. Oh, is it Delhi? Okay, thank you. So yes, sorry, slight confusion. So I think we'll go to Rwanda, then Shanghai, then Delhi, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. We start with Delhi. I'm happy to.
No, Rwanda, please. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Can I have the other slide, please?
Yeah, but yeah. There's obviously a slight delay with the slides, so bear with us, colleagues. And Andrea, can you give us Rwanda? I think Andrea has to reset the slides, some slight technical issue. Fantastic, thank you. Jean-Pierre, sorry about that, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, Andrea, for sharing this. And thank you for all the participants who are joining us in this webinar. My name is Jean-Pierre Mugiraneza. I'm from Rwanda, the same country as Lyon. I've been, for the last 4 years, I've been working on a program funded by FCDO. But normally I work for EDT as a Leadership for Learning lead. So about the implementation of the middle tier program in Rwanda, I wanted to talk about 3 features that can make this program implementation successful. One is the alignment with the country priorities. And second is minding the capacity of the middle tier. And then lastly, the sustainability of the middle tier program. Starting from the first, how the program, the middle tier program, can be aligned with existing country priorities. Maybe I can highlight some of the things that Leon tried to tackle on and maybe give an example of what BRF or the Building Learning Foundation program did in Rwanda. So the first problem, or the first question, was that as school leaders, we are working in isolation, and that has had an impact on school performance. For example, you could see 2 schools in one cluster or in one sector. Students who are attending the 2 schools are coming from the same environment, but looking at their performance, there is a substantial difference in their performance. So, which means that maybe one school has something to learn from the other. And again, the country had a priority of reinforcing collaboration among head teachers, school leaders, so that they can learn from one another. So that's why the middle tier program came in and aligned with that priority of ensuring collaboration among school leaders. So establishing a strong middle tier is important, but it can be strengthened only when it is aligned with existing policies. For example, my colleague Liwon just mentioned about some frameworks that are under development by the Rwanda Basic Education Board to ensure that the middle tier is well recognized through the system, and the actors, the national leaders of learning and local leaders of learning, are kind of supported by the policies. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the capacity of the middle tier. The capacity of national leaders of learning and the local leaders of learning. As Tony mentioned, these are the catalysts of the change management. The NLL and LLL. So they should have that necessary capacity to support, to solve the issues that are in that particular country. So an example on Building Learn Foundation, we collaborated with the University of Rwanda on an accredited course, a training for the middle tier, so that they have that capacity, and also the course meant to improve their confidence. Having something to share with others for the purpose of solving the issues that the program had. So the special feature of that accredited course, it was not for motivating the middle tier only, but also for helping them improve, starting with their schools and then cascade what they learn from the course to improve performance in other schools. So I have to talk about the particularity in the implementation of that middle tier program course. A course for NLs and LLLs, it is the assessment. So the assessment was meant for assessing the impact they make in their schools rather than assessing what they know. That was very important since they are the catalyst of the change management. Then we wanted school leaders who can support other school leaders to make change in their schools. And therefore, what the system assesses them for, it is the impact they make rather than the knowledge they get from other trainings. And that was very important. And then lastly, we can talk about the sustainability. The Building Learning Foundation was a program for 5 years, and we did a lot in collaboration with Rwanda Basic Education Board, the University of Rwanda, to establish the middle tier, but it needs to be integrated in the system. The institutionalization of the middle tier, of the roles and responsibilities of NLS and LLS to be institutionalized in the system. So one of the strategies is to ensure that, as I started saying, the policies are kind of considering these roles, and also the capacity development of NLLs and LLLs is kind of coordinated cross countrywide. So that's what we can say, that with that institutionalization, like having the policy supporting the middle tier, and also that helps the alignment with the roles and the existing roles and responsibilities in the system. I can say that at district level, then we have the district education officers, we have the sector education officers. So the role of the middle tier is kind of aligned to those roles so that the system is well supported. So this is working in Rwanda, and EDT is also implementing the same, a similar program in Sierra Leone. But as I'm winding up on this, the important point to note on this is to align with the roles and responsibilities in the system, and also aligning with existing structures in a way of solving issues that are in the system. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Lots to think about there in terms of those themes of alignment and professional development. And I'm also interested in the way in which new pathways are opening up here for the careers of the leaders of learning as well. Okay, thank you very much. And now I think if we can go to Shanghai, we can find the Shanghai slide. And I'm calling on Shangye and Away to give us some thoughts on implementation from the Shanghai perspective.
Yes, thank you, Tony. As we mentioned in webinar 1, that is Shanghai, our finding is a little bit different from other country case. That is, we are defining this middle tier space in Shanghai system. So we refine it as not as kind of a flat. It's more like a space. So what we here to share is more about from the systematic perspectives, not on single middle tier instructional leader. So first, I will share challenge first. That is what is not working, and then we will do the takeaway. Those are the what's working. I think that we remain those optimistic in the last. So for those challenges, the first one is about highly selective and a meritocratic environment. The middle tier in Shanghai actually is highly competitive working environment. Only a small fraction of all teachers in Shanghai educational system becomes part of this middle tier space due to this high level of self-determination and initiative and the motivation required to get access to the targeted positions. So the middle tier offers those formal positions. So they have to compete for that. Once there, the leaders are expected to benefit from the prestigious and the respect of those roles, which are also associated with increased financial funding for projects compared to teachers. So see, this is this kind of a mixed effect from this Shanghai middle tier space. And then we have this dilemmas, the motivation, performativity, and collaboration versus competition. Due to this high level of competitive and accountability, not only among middle tier professionals, but also among schools, the system run the risk of only pursuing reforms for the sake of competition. So we can see this kind of another side, this middle tier instructional leadership. How could they drive? They are not all the way our rosy picture. We have already find the other side of the picture. And we also found the complex contextual constraints. The scaling up best practice in Shanghai often face several difficulties that arise from realization that difficult local contexts could have different capabilities. Even though the middle tier offices can facilitate the process, the cost of failed projects is high in terms of both social and financial capital. So this is also like kind of we are sending this a warning sign that is those are not working. Okay. The last one is about teachers' reluctance towards an ever-changing environment. As this is kind of a dynamic, high-performing, but the cost is they have this kind of ever-changing environment. Educational reforms in Shanghai have been very frequent, and enabling support from the middle tier space has made it possible for school level to generally accept this ever-changing scenario. However, this change-focused system is not free from criticism. Teachers complain that increasing workload from middle-tier projects adds up to the standard teaching requirements. This results in many teachers become indifferent to projects or giving up on them altogether. So this is from me, and Wei will share those more optimistic message.
Thank you.
Wei.
So here I come with a yes, but. First, because it's highly selective, we got the most outstanding educators selected as really the elite professional leaders. Here, I will frame my takeaways actually in a way in response to Andy's remark on middle tier as a philosophy and middle tier as a structure. So the first point concerns the balance of international aid and international and independent capacity development. I think leading from the middle is fuel from within. I worked with a developing country 10 years ago. It was getting impressive international aid. But 7 years later, when I went back, it was still getting international aid. It still got very weak teacher education system. So 4 countries still struggling meeting with the basic literacy standards stipulated by the SDGs. I feel China might be giving some experiences or lessons. So the whole middle tier space in Shanghai is not just a modern creation, not the 21st century creation. It's a system established decades ago when China just started building its schooling system, right? At that time, it was weak in teacher education and lack of various resources. China did benefit from its external support, but the real engine for China's rapid education development was to select, empower, and harness the most outstanding educators from the front line of our schools so that they can guide, supervise, and support schools and teachers in need. And as Andy remarked, now the context has changed. In the earlier stage, the middle tier leaders really helped novice teachers to grow. And now they focus more on competence-oriented change and innovation for whole person development, as well as addressing the new forms of inequality. The second point is about the balance of competition and collaboration. As Shuangye noted, middle tier leaders, actually, they allocate a lot of projects and resources to teachers and schools in a way that drive schools, teachers, and even districts to compete. But in another way, middle tier leaders also connect isolated schools and foster collaboration by sharing and transferring experience from one school to another, and making schools responsible for each other's success. Finally, I would say it is not so difficult for government to build one or several successful schools, but it's really extremely difficult to improve quality and equity of a whole schooling system. So it requires continuous input from the government. I think middle tier system is a structure to join the knots. It is also a collective culture to navigate in societies which impose much increasingly complex expectation on the school system. So that is our sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wei and Shuangye. You've packed so much into one slide. That is so rich in terms of the insights. So much there, and so many important issues about getting the selection right, about the workload on the teachers, the teacher engagement. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's return to some of those themes in a moment in our discussion. But now let us turn to Delhi. So, Jobin, over to you. Tell us about implementation in Delhi.
Thank you so much, Tony, and a very warm welcome to all the participants. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm happy to share with you a case study from New Delhi in India. And our learnings from this case study as STIR Education. Just to give you a little bit of a background, STIR Education focuses on supporting the education ecosystem through improving intrinsic motivation of education officials and teachers. So under this objective of ours, we have been supporting the government of Delhi in India. And this case study revolves around the introduction of two new roles in the ecosystem, wherein in the middle tier, new roles were identified. These were mentor teachers and teacher development coordinators, wherein each school nominated a teacher as a teacher development coordinator, and a mentor teacher it can actually cater to several schools, sharing feedbacks and sharing best practices, their learnings, what they think needs to be improved in teaching, pedagogy, etc. So this the case study, it's on the TDC program in Delhi, wherein I would like to just highlight two key components of the program, wherein the first component was around orientation sessions that were conducted. And these sessions clarified on the roles and responsibilities of these mentor teachers and teacher development coordinators, and general practices for the role. So what are the general expectations and how they can go about implementing their plans in the system, in the existing system. The second and a more important component of this program was around developing support and feedback structures. So while the first one focused mostly on content delivery to the teacher level, the second one focuses more on listening and hearing back from teachers. So this essentially was aimed at building confidence and motivation. And all of these practices are embedded in that idea, wherein we want teachers to love teaching and students to love learning. Now, while this may sound like a very simple idea, wherein you have support systems and feedback structures, it really proved to be a powerful tool to create a lot of impact. And I would just like to highlight a few of them among many others. One, we were able to observe that there was improved collaboration among teachers. So this is an important component because in a government school setting, it is a very important aspect of improvement, wherein teachers need space for collaborations. So this program provided that, and hence we were also able to see that there is improved communication and, more importantly, ownership by teachers. So teachers were observed to have taken additional efforts to improve their teaching pedagogy. And the second and a more obvious impact that we would observe, we definitely saw, was on students, wherein we saw that even though the program was not directly targeted on improving student experience in the classrooms, but it definitely improved student experience and engagement in classrooms, wherein a lot of positive influence was observed on students. Students reported that they felt more engaged and safe in classrooms, and their learning curve, even though not measured in terms of learning outcomes per se, but their confidence was observed to be higher. And as we all know that schools were shut down during the COVID lockdown period, we saw that the teachers were also able to adapt to these unforeseen circumstances. So this was an impact that we had not planned for, but then the strengthening of the middle tier of the ecosystem helped deliver education to more than 1.6 million students of Delhi during the lockdown period. And in terms of scale, if we look at it, it's a huge number. And the impact on students and collectively on teachers, that turns out to be quite high. Some of the things that could be done differently, I'd just like to highlight, are, they revolve around, focusing more towards building buy-in within the stakeholders. Because when you talk about creating new roles from the existing system, there is definitely an addition of administrative burden on existing teachers. So brainstorming on how these could be managed, brainstorming with the teachers, school leaders, would turn out to be really useful in terms of improving the implementation of the program going forward. One of the things we also noticed that could be improved is on defining structured communication channels. So when you when you have teachers who kind of interact with different schools, and then there are sharing platforms wherein teachers share their best practices, it is always better to have structured communication channels that will help them in their systems to be able to navigate better. So these were some of the things that we thought that could be done differently. And keeping in mind the time, I just like to quickly focus on the key takeaways that we were able to get through this case study. One is the power and the importance of creating support systems and positivity. We felt that this contributes hugely to the effectiveness of the program. When teachers, they get a platform where they are listened to, where they can share collaboratively their experiences, their best practices, it hugely improves a culture of feedback sharing and learning. So it directly affects the teachers and improves their lifelong learning skills. Another key takeaway we felt was that not just focusing on one aspect, but maybe looking at multiple aspects. So, for example, at STIR Education, we focus on improving autonomy, mastery, and purpose for the education officials, teachers, and students. So through these multiple measures, we try and build our interventions around these and try and improve motivation among teachers through these aspects. Some other key takeaways that I would like to share are around systemic growth and how that affects student learning outcomes. So while, as I explained earlier, that this program was not directly targeted at students, but just because it was systematic and the structure was such that there is a flow of feedback and best practices across various hierarchy levels of the hierarchy, eventually students benefited. So that's something that we found that is quite useful in terms of being efficient with a program delivery, while also focusing on strengthening the system. And another, maybe just to end with this, point that I would like to share is on focusing on need-based learning for teachers. While this may sound generic, but I think what we learned from our study is that when teachers have these platforms where they can share best practices, they also have a collaborative platform to share learning needs. So while teachers can always have resources from outside of the school, these platforms really provide that necessary platform to be able to access learning opportunities on different skills. So I think that, according to us, had a lot of impact in terms of dissemination of learning and impact. Thank you so much. I'll stop with that. Back to you.
Great, Jobin. Thank you. Thanks again for such a tour de force. It's a really systematic view with just that one slide. Brilliant. So much to think about there. Let's reflect on some of those themes in just a moment. But first, I'm going to pass to Barbara, who's going to give a few overview remarks.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. It was really interesting to hear from our speakers on their insights on the program design and implementation. So I'm now going to share what we learned from the case studies and reported in the publication as considerations for policymakers in rolling out middle tier reforms. So what does it take to build strong instructional leadership at the middle tier, and what are the enabling conditions for these professionals to become positive change agents? We found across our case studies, policymakers used 4 common strategies to do this. So they envisioned instructional leaders as change agents, they professionalized the middle tier, They nurtured an empowering culture and a collective vision, and they adopted a learning by doing approach. So if we think about the vision, as we've heard a little bit today, in every case, the driver for strengthening the middle tier actors was a commitment to improve learning rather than an interest in the middle tier leaders per se. Policymakers understood that it's simply not possible to reach teachers in every classroom without relying on middle tier actors who can work with them on a regular basis. So if you want that system change, where you're trying to change practices rather than introduce technical solutions, the middle tier is really key. And so policymakers saw them more as more than managers who are keeping tabs on things, but as actors actually promoting and leading change. And to make this work, they purposely designed roles to deliver change and relied on middle tier actors as allies and trusted experts. And then in line with their vision, the policymakers really set about professionalizing the middle tier by focusing on getting the right people in post and making the positions attractive. So they invested in professional recruitment procedures and professional development for the middle tier actors. And most of the positions we looked at were based on peer leadership. So they relied on teachers or head teachers who were recognized as legitimate, instructed, and trusted practitioners themselves. And that was key to establish a culture of trust and collaboration between teachers and across schools, and also to because those actors understand the needs and challenges in the school environment. And often, usually they have no formal role in teacher evaluation. So it's a lot easier for teachers to open up to them. And as we've heard in the recruitment process, there were specific skills and competencies that were sought after, such as having critical and thinking and communication skills and being open-minded and having that capacity to give constructive feedback and to be collaborative. So we've heard from Rwanda, where they had developed a competency framework that they used for recruitment, and they made recruitment highly formal and visible. And that really added to the sense of status and high expectations for the role. And it's important to note here that in most of our case studies, the instructional leaders at the middle tier didn't have extra financial incentives at the time when we did the research, but they benefited from professional development and on-the-job training and support that they would not have had otherwise. So, for example, in Shanghai, so the middle tier leaders acknowledged that they benefit from many privileges that ordinary teachers do not easily have access to, such as professional prestige, social respect, and networking and funding opportunities. And we can see that the policymakers also nurtured and built a collective vision and an empowering culture. So they set up those professional learning communities and teacher networks. They empowered middle tier leaders with autonomy. And by doing that, they moved towards greater distributed leadership and allow for co-construction and prioritized collective learning. So, for example, in Wales, one of the associates said, we are solution builders, not decision makers. Or a leader of learning in Rwanda reported that before head teachers worked alone, but now we share the experience. So as a final point here, to make this work in the medium to long term, policymakers adopted this learning by doing approach to overcome challenges and to adapt and to continuously improve. I think that was made very clear from the speakers that it's not set in stone. You have to adapt all the time. And they recognize that this type of structural systemic change takes time. And you have to gradually build buy-in for these new roles or for these reforms. So we saw that instructional leaders in some of the case studies faced initial resistance until they managed to step by step gain the trust of their colleagues and make them see what they would gain and what they could gain from this new way of working. And just to conclude some considerations in terms of sustainability, implementation and design. So when you're thinking about sustainability and scalability, it's really important that you choose the right profiles and the right persons to be those instructional leaders and to occupy those roles. Because if you take supervisor roles, for example, there are often not enough of them already in the country. So the advantage of relying on school-based actors is that you have a large pool to draw from, and they can provide that regular support that is needed to make this work. And going further, you have to determine how to sustain the motivation of instructional leaders. And that includes determining whether role holders should get additional pay and whether this should be formalized in a career structure. And I think that's what we were hearing from Rhonda, or whether you can sustain the motivation through non-monetary incentives. And in our case studies, that question was, came largely unanswered, and I hope we can discuss this in the Q&A. And then in terms of recognizing that middle tier reforms are in effect system reforms, what I mean here is that in essence, it's about looking at the infrastructure of education systems and the relationships within them to promote a mindset towards collective responsibility. So you want to get to that stage where you're leading from the middle, as Andy Hargreaves was referring to, and where the middle tier is a force for change. And last but not least, you really want to commit resources to accompany middle tier development. So although middle tier reforms may be seen as relatively low cost interventions because you're already investing in your staff, governments must be prepared to commit resources and accompany the development of middle tier as those systems mature. So you've got to gradually build up funds to respond to program needs. And then you've got to also bear in mind that you need to set aside funding for monitoring, evaluation, and communication so that you're continuously adapting. And in the longer term, you need to bear in mind that you may need additional funding to create full-time positions or to establish new structures. And I'll hand it back to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Fantastic. Thank you for that very, very clear and practical analysis. So, time for a few questions. Are we permitted to go just a few minutes beyond the top of the hour? Will that work in terms of the Zoom? Does Zoom HQ permit this?
I think we can try. I think we should take 5 minutes.
Well, we'll see. Subject to the
really
power
behind
of
time.
the great Zoom. But okay. Well, look, just time for a few questions. So, one question, maybe Andy, you can have a go at this. A couple of people have asked about where are the inspectors? What happened to the inspectors? Where is accountability? What do you think about accountability, which we talked a lot about a few years ago on this world?
So thank you for that. I think so. You're starting off with the easy questions, I see, but we'll try and proceed from here. Years ago, in a book called Sustainable Leadership, we wrote the following sentence, which is accountability. Actually, it's not quite mathematically correct, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. Accountability should be the small remainder that is left once responsibility has been subtracted. So, in other words, accountability is important, but it shouldn't be the driver. It should be the thing that's, so you do the right thing, you bring people together, you build a professional environment of collective responsibility, and that is your driver. And every so often something goes wrong, somebody steals money or loses the plot and the focus. And then you need the accountability system to back you up. So I think that's the first thing that I would say. Second, there's what is very interesting about this set of papers is the juxtaposition of collaboration with hierarchy in several cases. I love the paper from Shanghai because sometimes people from outside say, oh, people in Shanghai, they're not very critical. Wow, are you guys critical? And so, like, really self-critical and open about, how these things fit together. And I have colleagues in Singapore, and also we had a case study in Hong Kong where people talk positively about the interrelationship between hierarchy and collaboration. It looks very different than it does in, I don't know, many Western European countries. But we say in the West that oil and water don't mix. And in the East, in Asian cooking, they say they do. And so that's like a good combination of hierarchy and collaboration that is very culturally sensitive, where in a way people trust the hierarchy. I think that there are two opposites of trust. One is absence of trust, when there's no relationship. So we really have to work on people who are in all these structures we're describing here, learning communities, focusing on relationship. But the other problem is mistrust. So if there's an accountability system that is not trusted, where the inspectors are disliked or unwanted or not regarded as competent, that it's not hierarchy that's a problem. It is a mistrusted hierarchy that is a problem.
Yeah. Great. That's really, really interesting stuff, Andy. I've just been informed that the Zoom requirements are that we must stop promptly. So I'm sorry about that.
That's why you're trying to shut me up. That's okay.
But we could go on for a long time. Maybe in terms of a very quick response, I could ask Leon about the question of sustainability. People have asked about really interesting model, but is it sustainable? So very quickly, Leon, what do you think from a Rwandan perspective?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, the sustainability, absolutely, we think the system can be sustainable based on how our education system is designed and is structured. For information, Rwanda Basic Education Board, we are implementing the agency. Once we have found that this is key elements to strengthen educational leadership here in our education system, there is no doubt that this is sustainable. So we are having these professional learning communities already designed, worked. So I think the sustainability, we don't have any concern, any problem for that. Thank you.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, we've had such a rich conversation. I'm sure you'll agree. And if you haven't yet read the report, I'm sure everyone will now want to do that. So thank you so much for the discussion, for the great inputs today and into the report. And now I hand back to Jordan for close.
Well, I think thank you very much to everyone. It's been a great presentation. I'm sorry that we did not have more time, but I just want to conclude, Andy started with references to the middle being, not being seen as important. But through these discussions, we see how critical it is. And to use a mixed metaphor, on one hand, if we look at the structure and the philosophy, from the structure side, it's the glue that holds the system together. And on the other end, in terms of philosophy and process and human relations, it's the oil that makes the engine run. So I think in a way, it's critical. That's the first point. And I think in terms of scalability, sustainability, and so on, the other lesson that comes across is that there's no one-size-fits-all model. These are models with good practices that can be replicated in different contexts, taking account of all that was emphasized, that it's about the culture. It's a culture of change that we need to install with the new interpretation of leadership, leading from the center, as Andy calls it. And I think that's critical. And then to finally say, one of my criticisms of schools and education systems is that we're supposed to be in education, but often we are not learning organizations. And I think central to this better utilization of the middle tier is to reinstill the culture of learning at the center. And let me stop there and repeat once again, a great thanks to all of the presenters, Andy, Leon, the first three, and to EDT. And hopefully we may be able to follow up online with all of the participants. So once again, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye. Also, thank you.